you feel a lot more empowered when you're working and you're pushing forward a project that you believe in and it's for yourself.
Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio, a podcast that talks with architects to learn how they use Apple products in the practice of architecture, with your host, Neal Pan. Support for Inside the Apple Studio comes from Monograph. Monograph is the cloud-based practice operations solution built for architects by architects. Learn how Monograph can help you be more productive at monograph.com. In this episode, I'm privileged to have on the show an entrepreneur, strategist, and architectural designer who has worked for one of the largest architectural firms in the world. He's the son of immigrants from southern China, and from his Midwest upbringing has founded several businesses and has a natural curiosity that is helping to build the next generation of resources and tools designed specifically for architects. I'd like to welcome Robert Yuan to the show.
Thank you.
I appreciate you joining me today. Robert, I'd like to start off by having you kind of explain what growing up in Chicago was like and the influence of learning how to run a small family-owned restaurant had on you.
Oh, wow. Going way back, it was tough. My parents were immigrants, not very highly educated. Lived in a really tiny apartment where I shared a bedroom with my two older brothers, an uncle, and my grandpa. So it was a big household in a very small apartment. It was tough. It was gritty. And I think that teaches a lot for a young child in terms of what struggles are really like to grow up in a household like that, and then having to help the family out in terms of managing a small local Chinese restaurant.
Yeah. How did that influence what you ended up? I mean, did that maybe influence you to kind of run your own business eventually? And we'll get to that a little later, but do you think that had an influence on what you're doing today?
I think it might have, just like watching my dad try to figure it out and take that project on head on.
Right.
So it must have had an influence. It also like made it very clear that I never want to get into the restaurant business ever in life. It's extraordinarily hard. But I think it does teach us a lot about like having ambition, working hard, and okay failing. Like we definitely had a few restaurants, and some were successful and some were very not successful. And at the end of the day, we survived and we moved on with our lives. And I think that was a really good learning lesson that's hard to learn without having the same exact upbringing.
You next were on an architectural track in high school, ultimately leading you to study architecture at the University of Illinois.
Yep.
What took you to taking architecture or that track in high school?
Oh, wow. Well, it was funny. Like growing up, I was classic architect story. Like I think we hear this probably 90% of the time, but I love playing with Legos.
Okay.
But coming from a poor household, like really realistically, that's all the toys that my parents could buy for me at the time. I never had a video game, never had other toys. Legos were affordable, cheap to say nonetheless. So as soon as I got into laying tech in Chicago, it was very clear like, oh, like I kind of like this already. I kind of like to draw. It was a pretty no-brainer decision to go down that course track at high school. And I did really well. There was a new house competition the last 2 years, both junior year and senior year, that I placed both times. The last senior year placed first, which won me my first architectural job. It was an internship at Halliburton Root.
Did they find out about you, or were they like somebody that worked there, a judge on that learned about you?
It was a competition across all public high schools in the city. And the prizes were, well, it was a trophy and placement in terms of an internship in participating firms.
Oh, wow.
I do have to take that back. I think my very first office was at Rada Architects,
Okay.
which did mostly higher like educational work in the city. Then my second internship, so I won the first in junior year, and then senior year I won the position at Halliburton Root, which is one of the oldest firms in Chicago. They were one of the original firms to essentially design Soldier Field, just to kind of date how how old the firm is.
That must have been an interesting experience then, working for such an established firm.
So much history. It was great. It was beautiful.
When you then went on to university, was there ever a class or a professor that had a big impact on you personally?
There was one in particular. It was well, there's two actually. The first professor, his name is Rusty Walker. Coincidentally, he's also now a principal at Halliburton Root. But I remember his comment during final review that the project was so strong that it was stronger than most graduate work. And that it was very nice of him to say that, but it also gave me the confidence I needed to keep going. Until this day, I still remember that quote. Then the second professor is Richard Blunder, who I ended up working for him shortly afterwards. But he was my senior studio professor. He essentially led the studio in terms of the Lyceum competition, which was a international competition. The goal was to design a market in Mexico City. I placed first, and the prize was a traveling fellowship, which was amazing. Like I spent next year afterwards backpacking around the world.
Congratulations on winning that. And what was that experience like being able to travel around the world on this fellowship?
Oh, like just you have to reimagine yourself being 21, giving a large pool of money, and just the goal was just like travel. It was amazing. I envy that time in my life, and I would do anything to get it back.
Right.
Incredible. I think I did 22 countries in about 10 and a half months.
Wow.
Across continents, Europe and Asia.
My goodness. Wow. Do you have a favorite place you visited or thing that you saw?
Depends on the country. I think generally speaking, like I love Spain and Italy. In Spain, I love a small town called Granada.
Uh-huh.
The castle in Granada called the Alhambra, which was the farthest stronghold of the Muslim when Muslim kind of had a control over Europe. It was the farthest palace and fort at the time.
Right.
Just amazing culture and beautiful weather. In Italy, I love all the major cities, but the Amalfi Coast is one of my favorite places to go and will love to revisit.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I have to agree. I spent some time there myself. Not enough though. Not enough.
It's beautiful. It was classic, right? You rent a little scooter, you get like an Italian scarf, and you spend a day on along the coastal highway.
Right.
Fantastic.
A little scary driving along that highway, isn't it? In parts.
I was 21, so
okay.
I was not scared of most things. I would say I'm a lot scarier of things today.
Okay, I just remember being in a van ourselves. It was a school trip when I was overseas, and being on that van riding along that coastal hill. There was definitely times where I looked out the window and all I saw was ocean.
Yes.
That's great. What a wonderful experience. After you returned from that, you went back to school, right?
I worked for a year for Richard. As soon as I came back, I wrote him an email, wanted to say thank you, and ended up working for him for the next year and a half, right up until the 2009 recession, and then I went back to graduate school.
Okay. Was the recession the reason why?
It was not. I think now that I'm reflecting back, there's a lot of moments in my life where I would consider myself extraordinarily lucky. It was not planned. I had no idea that recession was already going to hit. And you don't know because you apply to school 1 year ahead, right? Like, so I already applied in 2008, acceptance letters in March of 2009.
Yeah.
So like, the fall classes of 2009 in terms of University of Michigan. And that was also like right at the beginning of the recession. So I just got extraordinarily lucky in terms of timing.
Sure. Now, while there, you had a dual master's degree, right? Architecture and digital technology?
I did the first Masters of Architecture first. The program wasn't launched yet. I was actually part of the very first class of the Masters of Science in Digital Technologies. So what happened was my thesis was about using the Microsoft Connect, which at the time was brand new, to essentially scan spaces and use and envision using the Microsoft Connect as a design tool in terms of how to essentially see spaces through a different lens.
Interesting. Okay.
What was fascinating was that professors knew that I had the ability to essentially hack technology together. I was essentially writing a little bit of code to break into the Microsoft Connect. And then I was trying to couple that with some of the scripts I was writing in Rhino.
Okay.
So I recruited for the new program that was like, oh, it'll be a perfect match. I can continue my research for another year and get a second master's with a focus in digital technologies, scanning, and robotics.
So, what did the digital technologies degree? You said you were part of the first class.
Yeah.
What was the idea of that master's, and what was the focus in general, and then specifically your? I mean, it sounds like you just continued what you were doing.
I think that helped. And knowing anything that's ever first, obviously there was still a lot of things to be figured out from the administrative level in terms of course load and direction. But generally, the theme was to have a specific master's program that focuses on digital tooling. It was great foresight from the dean at the time, Monica, to essentially start a program that specializes in digital tooling, knowing that the trajectory of the profession is headed that way, that tooling, design, technologists, software, and even hardware and robotics and digital fabrication were all evolving very quickly to the point where we're going to have specialized talent soon enough that would do this type of work.
That's really fascinating that you were able to kind of take an interest of yours and have a degree in it at the same time. Again, another fortuitous opportunity.
Yeah, I finished the degree and there were absolutely no jobs that had that job description. It was a little too early for the times when I finished.
So then where did you think that education, and did you have some expectations from your prior experience in your career as before your master's, where did you think that was going to take you in the career of architecture?
At the time, I had dreams of becoming a professor.
Interesting. Okay.
And it was more or less a litmus test for myself to see if I would stay on for a PhD.
Really? So why didn't you?
It took a toll. I think doing the first master's and then doing another year afterwards took a toll on me. I needed a bit of a reset at the time. And it was very clear to me at the time that even if I wanted to do a PhD, going directly into it wasn't the right move.
Okay. Where did you then go then if you weren't going to continue with the PhD?
I went home.
Interesting. Okay.
4 hours away. I did not know what to do next. So I went home. I packed my furniture and everything I owned in Ann Arbor, put it in a U-Haul truck, and came back to Chicago. Spent a little bit of time of just thinking through, while also working on my portfolio, of what I want to do next, or what type of problems I want to solve, or what kind of work I want to explore. And then whenever I get tired, I'll be working on my portfolio.
Yeah.
What was interesting though was as I was working on my portfolio and I was trying to archive everything I've learned from my master's studies, is that I started to essentially develop a list or a bookmarking tool to help myself save everything I've learned. That quickly grew into the first venture that I started, which is called Section Cut.
Right.
Section Cut is essentially a bookmarking tool. I built it for myself in the beginning. It was really rudimentary. It was just a way for me to say, these are all the theoretical texts I've read, I've valued. These are all the tools that I've learned. These are all the plugins that I need to kind of keep in handy somewhere. It was just a way for me to kind of list things, an indexical list of everything I've learned at Michigan. What was amazing was it was web-based because I didn't know where I was going to move. It would be nice if it wasn't on a hard drive. I was carrying around all these zip drives and hard drives. I know that that's not the way I want to approach the project.
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of how Section Cut started when I was still working on my job applications and portfolio that then quickly led into my employment at Skidmore, Owens & Merrill in Chicago.
All right. Well, we're going to come back to section cut in a minute, but
Okay.
I want you to talk a little bit about working for SOM and what that was like.
Oh, I loved it. It was incredible. I think like I've never been being at Michigan and being around incredibly intelligent students, classmates, professors was amazing. And SOM kind of measured up in terms of like being in a very identical, was very similar type of working culture, but everyone was actually a practitioner. Right? Like everyone, we make buildings, we make tall buildings, and the talent was incredible across the field. I had an amazing time working at SOM, and it's due to personal reasons why I left. It was a relationship, and the work life balance was very stressful at the time.
So you had a great experience there, but you ended up moving on and eventually you move across the country and start working for Blue Homes, right? What brought you to the San Francisco Bay Area? That's a big jump.
That's a big jump. That's a really big jump. I can say like one of the big reasons for me to leave, when you work for a big architectural firm, I think a lot of the audience can relate. You put in a lot of hours, and they're not very healthy for a relationship. So due to that, we decided to make a big move. Always wanted to be on the coast. Always wanted to be in California.
Okay.
I know I have family members and cousins here in San Francisco. So packed my bags, moved on to San Francisco. Blue Homes was completely accidental. My thesis advisor at Michigan, Carl Dotman, was also the vice president of Blue Homes, who led the entire design department. I got recruited to essentially like apply and be part of Blue Homes with the job description of sitting between design and architecture and the manufacturing department, which made a lot of sense where I had both expertise in terms of doing work on the architectural end and then having some of the digital tooling side that was necessary for the factory to execute on the prefab homes.
That must have been a pretty interesting experience there. What did you take and what did you learn from that you brought from SOM to this experience?
Oh, wow. Blue Homes was super fun. I think it really ignited a fire in me in terms of like tackling really large, complicated problems. How do you get a prefabricated home down a highway? How do you make all their walls fold? And when it unfolds, it's already completely furnished. These are really hard, complicated problems, and like I had a blast, just being part of the team and trying to figure out how to pull that off.
Now, I noticed looking over your work experience over a period of a few years, you worked for a few different firms, kind of relatively briefly at each one. Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe why you moved from different firms in a relatively short period of time? Was it just an opportunity came up, or what was your thinking at the time?
So at the time, even though SOM was great and Blue Homes was great, at that time to date, my best architectural experience was my time spent at Wilkinson Blender, which was the firm pre-master's degree.
Okay.
And the reasons why I loved it was one, the culture was incredible. I think like we were all, it was a really small firm, no more than 10 people, and we looked out for each other. It was a very different type of working atmosphere, where SOM was extraordinarily corporate, and Blue Homes was like an aggressive startup, so it just grew really fast. It was also a very large environment. I went looking for that experience again. Essentially decided to just work and look for smaller firms, and I'm trying to find an environment where I know, well, one, the work is good, and two, that I will have a really enjoyable time working at. And that's probably part of the reason that I jumped around a little bit, because I'm kind of also like hunting for that experience that I'm longing for, that I'm trying to replace.
Now, while you were doing that, you also got to your opportunity to teach, right, at the Academy of Art in San Francisco. How did that come about, and what did you teach?
I taught an intro to digital representation. And really what that meant was I taught AutoCAD, Rhino, Photoshop, and Illustrator as a prelude to Studio so that the students would be ready and fully equipped in terms of the tool sets that they will have to draw representational drawings.
Okay.
I know I like to teach. I really enjoy time in academia. That was a big reason why I continued to go on with the second master's. So it gave me an opportunity to, especially after Blue Homes, was really a experimental years for me, where I tried a few small firms, but also dabbled a bit in teaching.
So you got to scratch that itch, so to speak, of the teaching bug.
Yeah.
So while all of this is happening, I want to come back to Section Cut, because Section Cut became more than just your little interior hobby that you were kind of creating for yourself. It became something more than that.
Right.
What did it become, and what was your vision for it once it did become something more public?
It was really exciting. I started something all by myself, and then before it even took off, I was still in daily, almost weekly communication with my classmates from Michigan, going back to that Chicago time. I immediately brought on 3 other partners. I was joined by Cal Sturgeon, John Stewart, and Dan Wiseman. All classmates. We all graduated from the University of Michigan together, but they saw a much bigger potential with Section Cut. It was like, oh, this could be a platform where not only myself, but other users, other students, other architects, other designers can be essentially curating tools, and then we can make that curation public, which was really powerful. Like, oh, we can now have some transparency into what other students are using, what other architects or young designers were using and saving, and what they want to essentially disclose in terms of their personal toolkit.
So I'm curious, how did you develop it? Was it just all HTML, or how did you build that?
At the time, the first version was all HTML, a little bit of PHP, but generally speaking, it was just HTML. Pretty simple.
Uh-huh.
It was not an app. It was just a straight website. And, at the first early users, they all filled out the Google form, and I manually entered those tools or those resources for them.
I see. You were doing all the HTML at the time.
I was, yes.
Wow, that's a big job.
It was fun. It was my nights and weekends for a very long time.
Now, was that something you ever envisioned monetizing, or were you able to ever monetize it?
We were. So like part of the interesting strategy was, if we're collecting resources at the time, a lot of those resources were also on Amazon and other like shopping sites. What was amazing is there's something called affiliate model, where we were making a little bit of money off the commission of driving traffic to Amazon.
Okay.
It never made us a lot of money, but it was like a little bit of a proof of concept that this model could work. That later evolved where we finally, well, one, all 4 of us have a really deep interest in education. We ended up pulling and looking at our library, this massive library now of resources, and developing one-off courses, specifically around digital tooling. So like introduction to Rhino, introduction to 3D scanning, introduction to like 3D modeling, introduction to CNCing. And as soon as we wrapped up designing these courses, we started selling them to universities.
Okay.
Some of our biggest clients were, well, one, University of Michigan was very grateful and had us come by a few times. University of Tennessee, Boston Architectural College, University of Virginia were all clients of ours at the time. And we ran those workshops on the weekend, so I would be taking the red eye on a Friday after work to teach on a Saturday, and then took another red eye on a Sunday to get back to work on Monday.
Wow. Holy smokes. And you complained earlier about working at SOM and not having a good work-life balance. That sounds like a bad work-life balance right there.
Yeah, you can tell that my relationship did not get better. I did not learn. The only difference was you feel a lot more empowered when you're working and you're pushing forward a project that you believe in and it's for yourself.
Yeah.
That's something I saw when I was really young. I saw it in my dad's eyes, and I didn't fully understand until I was a little bit older. And I was like, oh, like I don't mind working 80-hour weeks. What I do mind is working 8-hour weeks for someone else.
Yeah.
Just like studio, where studio was amazing in school, and we've all done this, where we work enormous amount of time, but that's time invested in yourself. And I think there's a big difference for me, and that was something that like was pretty eye opening. Was like I don't mind working hard as long as it's something that I want to do and it's something that I believe in.
Did this all lead eventually to Dixon and Mo?
It did. So what happened was University of Michigan had Section Cut essentially come back as a media company to essentially participate on the first robotics conference in the United States, the Robotics and Architecture Conference, which was also hosted by the University of Michigan. So it was really great. I got to come back to campus, did a couple podcasts and interviewed some of my professors. We talked about the state of architecture at the time in terms of robotics. And through that conference, I met a friend who was a mutual friend to Alex and Mo, who was doing their MArch at the time at MIT. That's eventually how I met Alex and Mo. They soon graduated from MIT, and they were in a U-Haul traveling across country to San Francisco, coincidentally, so it was perfect. We decided on a meeting date, we met in person, and the rest was history. Like I think we kept meeting for weeks on end until a point where like they helped me rebuild Section Cut. Like so we took that small little website and turned it into a full-blown web app where users can create their own logins, users can now have their own bookmarking tools, essentially we turn a little small website into a giant application.
What do they actually do there at that company and you ended up joining them, right?
I did. So like I said, we all started off as architects, except they, coming from MIT, much smarter than I am. And they were already writing code and building apps on the side.
Uh-huh.
So immediately after school, they decided to not actually practice as a traditional architect. And as two really close friends who were also roommates and classmates, decided to freelance and build apps and build websites as a business or as freelancers. Obviously, they just graduated, didn't have any projects yet, and they met me and was like, "Look, like if you want a project, let's work on Section Cut together."
Yeah,
this would be a great way to just kind of get everyone started, and that's kind of how we started working together. They already came to me with all the skill sets in terms of like knowledge of how to build apps and websites, way more than me.
Section Cut becomes something more than it was originally.
Yep.
At that company, you did also more things, right? You offered, software consultancy, right? Working with architecture, engineering, manufacturers, and construction corporations.
Yep.
So what all was your involvement at that point? And were you still practicing architecture at that point, or did you give up working at a firm and do this full time?
So you have to, like, that was an interesting time in my life. I was working at a firm. I was flying on weekends to do workshops. I was also trying to hang out with Alex and Mo whenever I can on weekdays. Something had to give. There weren't enough hours in the day for me to do any of the things I was doing successfully.
Yeah.
So what happened was I took a leap of faith, stopped working as an architect, spent a little bit more time on Section Cut to see if there were any legs there.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, decided to join Alex and Mo and start what the agency was called, Dixon and Mo.
I see.
And the role was the agreement, generally speaking, was they would do the work because they're amazing designers and amazing software engineers. They can write code, and I will do the project management and business development side of the company.
How did that go?
It was a tough learning curve, right? Like I went from a designer to a junior project manager to convincing two friends to let me manage their business, and it was tough. I think the early days was like, okay, well, Robert, my job now is to secure clients. I was like, right, Never done that before, but we were able to sell section cut to universities. I think conceptually I can figure this out. And that's kind of how us working together started. Like I figured out how to market our services. I figured out how to write contracts, figured out how to ask for money, very hard. I figured out how to ask for more money, which is even harder. And then when money was due, to figure out how to ask for payments, which I think is even scarier. It's one thing to say like you agreed to sign this contract for X amount of dollars. It's another thing to be like 3 months later, it was like, hey, it's time to collect. And then to do that recurrently while staying in good faith and staying, having the right attitude in terms of how to ask for payment.
Do you think any skills you learned by being an architect, practicing, helped you do any of that?
Absolutely. Well, one, let's be very honest with ourselves. I don't really have another formal education in anything other than architecture.
Yeah.
Right? Like my high school was architecture, my undergrad was architecture, both masters were architecture. I really can't even draw on other experiences. So absolutely. I think a lot of it was just abstracting what I've learned into something that I can lean on and use. So a lot of that is just like having, the word I like to use a lot is like having context. We use that word a lot in studio, use that word a lot in architecture, of like the design have to have context, the design systems have to have context, you have to like bring in the site, you have to look at things as a whole. And it's really, if you abstract it, it's no different when you're trying to run a business. Yes, you do need to write one contract, and yes, you do need to solve this scope of work, but how does that relate to the current grand scheme of things? How does that relate to the client's overall business agenda? How does it relate to our business agenda? And then to make sure that you take everything that needs to be accounted for before executing on a plan.
At Dixon & Moe, you then co-found Monograph.
Yes.
Now, initially, Monograph was a subscription-based website building platform for architects. Did that grow out of Dixon & Moe on the side? Help us understand how that happened.
So what's really interesting is, like most architectural services, a design agency is also a service-based business model. So we had really busy months and we had really slow months.
Yeah.
The good things about slow months is we just built internal projects. Well, we always try to scratch an itch in terms of what we wanted to learn or a problem that we wanted to solve.
Okay.
Monograph actually took on more than just those two life forms. It took on many. It was a name we had and we owned that we used specifically as a way to essentially find opportunities to address needs in the architecture and engineering spaces, particularly because we cared about it, and particularly because we wanted to really find a problem and a solution for the industry that we care deeply about. We did start Monograph at when really started to take off was Monograph websites, and it was a website builder for architects, which is super simple, really easy, drag and drop, and we created beautiful templates. And that went extraordinarily well in the early days until we met some friction in terms of competition. It was hard to compete with a much larger firm like Squarespace, WordPress, or Wix. We couldn't compete on scale. We couldn't compete on volume. We couldn't compete on price. And honestly, at the end of the day, I don't think we were addressing a hair on fire type of problem, specifically for architects and designers within the AEC. So it was back to the drawing board. Let's make sure we build solutions to problems we feel like are really a really big problem, right? Like having a beautiful website is a problem, but it's probably not the biggest problem an architect might have.
Yeah.
So it was really trying to go back and figure out what is that really, really big problem that we can work on. And that landed us to where Monograph is today. And it was really just reflecting on our past and with a lot of help from our friends at the time of hearing their stresses about like project management is extraordinarily chaotic. And manage a project, we have no visibility into projects. Projects are always late. We always lose money on projects. We always overspend time, and by the time we know it's too late. We cannot see the link between timesheets and why isn't timesheets a part of project management. There are a lot deeper questions like how do we address communication with consultants? A lot of information is buried in emails. There's no great to-do list. Almost all the project management tools are generalized, so it's extraordinarily hard to make it work for architecture. There were so many questions at the time around this topic that like that's it. That's what we're going to work on.
Yeah. And you've been successful at that.
I wouldn't say successful yet. I'd say we have a lot of work ahead of us, but we're moving. There's momentum.
Awesome. I want to wrap up kind of this section by asking you a question because you've had a pretty unconventional architectural journey here. How has this path in our profession, this architecture profession that is, been different than you thought it might have been when you first went to college or say were in architectural classes in high school? How's it been different?
Oh wow, like since I was really little, the version I saw myself was an architect. So obviously I'm very far from that now. I'm not making or designing buildings anymore. The trajectory that I've landed on has taken me very far away from architecture in the traditional sense.
One of the things I remember from when I first started architecture school was I think the first thing they said, beyond just look to your right and look to your left, those people won't be here when you graduate, but was that with an architectural degree, you can go on to do many different things. And I think that one of those first classes that I took at Cal Poly was exactly that, was a stream of people that came in and spoke to us about how they were doing different jobs within or around the architectural profession and not doing traditional practice. So I think you're a perfect example of what you can do with an architectural degree that may not have anything to do with the traditional practicing of architecture. And I think you've been very successful at showing a path that anyone who's listening can be inspired by.
Well, thank you. I think there's still a long road ahead. And personally, there's still a lot of learnings that I need to accomplish. But I'm also very proud and very happy for where things have ended up so far.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And right now we're going to take a short break. And after, we'll explore your exposure to the Mac and learn a little bit more about your Apple journey right after this. Support for Inside the Apple Studio comes from Monograph. Are you tired of using dated and clunky software to manage your firm? Or do you feel frustrated wrangling all of your spreadsheets to get a clear view of where your projects stand today? Monograph is here to help. Designed by architects for architects, Monograph allows you to track your time, your projects, and your budgets in real time. With their awesome Money Gantt, you can immediately see whether you are under or over budget. Do you need to adjust your projects week to week? Their new tool, Resource, allows you to reallocate your team's time and track its impact on your remaining budget. Be proactive with Monograph. Learn more at monograph.com, and thanks to Monograph for their support. Welcome back, everyone. Robert, I wanted to ask you, as you've gone through this architecture journey, now let's talk a little bit about your Apple product and, eventually working on a Mac journey that you've had. I'm curious, did you start, with an Apple, like say an iPhone or iPad before you ever started using a Mac?
No, I was 100% PC focused. I did not even touch a Mac until I met Alex and Mo.
Wow, interesting. All right. So while you were practicing architecture, everything was PC based, AutoCAD.
100%.
100%. So
yeah.
Once you met Alex and Mo, why did you start using a Mac once you met them?
Honestly, at the time, it was Macs are beautiful products, and Alex and Mo refused to have PCs anywhere near them. So part of the working relationship was like I had to learn how to use Mac.
Interesting.
It was not allowed to have PCs anywhere near the two designers.
Okay. And not only that, but you weren't allowed to even use a PC.
We it's just like, don't want to look at it, don't want to deal with it. At the time, also, we were just three people starting a company. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of collaboration between workflows.
Sure.
Even though I didn't write a lot of code, I had to chip in whenever I need to. And having one OS across all three members just made a lot more sense versus trying to figure out how to make a Mac and PC workflow work. And I was outnumbered. So I caved. I was like, okay, fine. I will learn how to use a PC even though I've used a Mac even though I've never used a Mac before.
How's that experience been?
It was a little tough in the beginning, right? It's just there's always a learning curve of learning a different operating system and
Sure.
switching between PCs and Mac. But at the end of the day, like I love it, and like now I'm at a point where I'll never go back.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at my desk right now. It's just it's Apple products everywhere.
So they got you on a Mac, and then eventually you're using Apple. Everything is Apple.
Everything. Like I have literally the AirPods in my hands. I'm looking at an iPhone on my desk. I'm using my MacBook Pro as my computer right now. It's all Mac.
Now that you're all on Macs, what sort of challenges have you guys had at Monograph or even before that in has using a Mac been a barrier, I think, is what I'm trying to get at to what you've done at Monograph or previously at Dixon and Moe?
Generally speaking, I think 99% of the time it has not. And the big reason is because we are always designing web-based applications.
Okay.
Honestly, all we need Chrome. That's the most popular browser out there, and that's what we designed for. It doesn't really matter that if we're on a Mac or a PC in terms of writing software.
I'm curious. So when you're developing software for Chrome, what are you actually using to do that? Is it all in a text editor, or are you using some sort of other app to create your code?
No, it's a fancy text editor. We've evolved to the point where I don't even know anymore. I know when we started off, it was Sublime, which was a coding language text editor program. I think we've moved on to a little bit more robust tool that allows a little bit more collaboration and tracking for coding errors. But generally speaking, at a very high level, it's a text editor. Like we use text editors to write code.
What other sort of applications or services do you use in managing your business at Monograph?
I can tell you one of my favorite, which we've used to kind of book meetings, is Calendly. I love Calendly. Like before Calendly, what would happen was I would ask you, Neal, when are you free?
Right.
You give me a date and time, and more than likely I'll say I can't do that date and time.
Yeah.
And then like another 20 emails would go back and forth before we finally find a date and time that works. Calendly is directly integrated with my calendar. I can tell it what the duration of the meetings are, how do I want to space my meetings, and then I just give the link out and then allow you to essentially pick a date and time that works. And everything else is done automatically, which is great. So now there's way less more emails, and like we go right into meeting times a lot faster.
I can vouch for that. Setting this up and setting up our previous meetings was really simple, and you didn't have the, like you say, the back and forth emails.
Yeah.
So that's a great service. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, since you've been on a Mac for a little while and you've got a bunch of other Apple devices there, what's your favorite thing about using a Mac?
My favorite thing is actually how intertwined the ecosystem is at the end of the day.
Uh-huh.
Like how I can use FaceTime on my phone or on the laptop, how contacts are all integrated, how messages are integrated, how simplicity the user design interfaces are. But at the end of the day, it's really about how well integrated the entire ecosystem of Apple products are. It just allows me to transition from one device to another so seamlessly that it's like, I think it's impossible if I was still using an Android or a PC.
I happen to agree with you. That's one of my more favorite things is you're able to, as you said, pick up one device, go from your phone to your iPad or your Mac,
Yep.
back and forth, and you're still continuing the same conversation, say with messages or your contacts. Everything is syncing through, and it creates a wonderful experience.
Yep. It's less like, oh, I have to pair or I have to like log out or log in. It removes a lot of the nuances and the headaches that it might causes when you are switching devices. In current times, like let's face it, like we all have probably one too many devices, but we all have them, and we rely on them to get work done. So it's absolutely helped from a personal level and also from a business level that everything's interconnected.
If anyone's listening is considering a Mac in their business, what advice would you give them?
I would say do it. If you look at the cost, yes, we all can agree it's more expensive than PC. But I would 100% vouch for MacBooks and Apple products every day.
I found that the length of time that I tend to use the products, I mean, I have a 11-year-old iMac that my kids are still using for their schoolwork, and it works just fine for what they're doing. So the length of time that you can use a product like that is just amazing. So I think that's another thing that's really helpful.
100% agree.
Okay, so let's move into our final segment here. We've got some questions to wrap up our interview with. Let's move right into the first one here.
Okay.
What's your favorite word?
This changes week by week. This week is tenacity.
What's your least favorite word?
Can't.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Landscape, greenery.
What turns you off?
Closets.
What sound or noise do you love?
Water.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Sirens.
What's your favorite curse word?
The F word.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Oh, interesting. When I was little, I always wanted to be an astronaut.
So what profession would you not like to do?
Oh, we already know this. Restaurant work.
That's right.
I made a promise to my dad. I was gonna do work as hard as I can in school and never work in a restaurant.
Oh, wow. All right. That's great. What a wonderful way to wrap up this conversation, Robert. Robert, thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I have been your host, Neal Pan, and thank you for listening to this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. I'd like to thank my guest, Robert Yuan, for joining me, and Monograph for their support. Learn more about Monograph at monograph.com. Find the show in your favorite podcast player by searching for Inside the Apple Studio, and support the show by leaving a 5-star rating and comment in Apple Podcasts. Remember to follow the show by selecting the follow button in Apple Podcasts or in your favorite podcast app. Inside the Apple Studio is a production of Apple for Architects at apple4architects.com.